She was training to be a teacher. He was an increasingly popular television personality. Then Dean and Wendy married. The doctor advised them their second child was going to be abnormal and they should terminate the pregnancy. What should they do? What would you do? How would you advise anyone in this situation?
I was on medication and I fell pregnant, and the doctors had told me that the medication that I was on could cause an abnormality for the baby. So they had arranged for me to have an ultrasound, but also to have an abortion before they even knew what was wrong with the baby. They just arranged to get rid of the child without even asking me.
From large cities like this to the smallest country towns across the world, abortion is presented as an issue of choice. But whose choice? The mothers, the fathers, the babies? I'm John Mackay. Join me on a journey from the enjoyable beginnings of life to what can be the terminal choice.
I was told by my authority figure that it was a blob of tissue. And even though I was the mother too, I wanted to believe that. But when I had that abortion, I supposedly liberated myself, but I knew I killed that baby. And it was something that I came to over a period of time.
I was an ardent supporter of the women's liberation movement, the feminist movement in the 1960s and 1970s, and I believed then in abortion on demand. It seemed to me the most obvious thing that it was the woman's right to choose. And indeed, as a young woman, I had an abortion myself and thought very little of it at the time. But it was only some years later, when I actually had a baby, that I started to really reflect upon how human life begins and how precious it is, and what a marvelous experience it is for women when they take the positive step. And I've now really changed my mind very much on abortion. I'm really committed to the idea that every baby is a human being from the moment of conception, and that it's far more a real feminist perspective to protect that human life and to stand up for the civil rights of the unborn baby. And I think it will make women much more strong, much more self-confident if they do defend human life in this way and not get railroaded into this easy abortionism, which is so often materialistic and to which they're so often urged, I'm afraid, by men.
One man has influenced many women to consider their developing child to be less than human because of his claims about how it developed in the womb.
The idea that a human embryo goes through its evolutionary stages of fish, animal, human being goes back to a German biologist named Ernst Haeckel. Now in 1868 he published a series of diagrams where he had a fish embryo, a series of animals and then a human embryo side by side, and they all looked the same. Now he then used those to teach that a human embryo develops through its evolutionary history as it grows in the womb. Well, 6 years later, that's 1874, a German anatomist, one Professor Wilhelm Hiss, showed that Haeckel's diagrams were false. In fact, Haeckel had deliberately faked them to fit his belief in evolution. In spite of that, Haeckel's drawings went on being published for over 100 years in school textbooks, not because they were facts, but because they popularised the belief in evolution. As recently as 1992, two prominent scientists published a pro-abortion book called The Facts of Life. Now its theme was that the human race gradually acquired humanity by evolution, and so in parallel an unborn baby develops humanness through its development in the womb. And sure enough, they used Haeckel's diagrams. In 1997, the London Times finally revealed the truth to the general public. They printed Haeckel's diagrams and pictures of real embryos next to one another, and their headline says it all: Haeckel was a liar. Embryos provide no evidence of evolution, but Haeckel's lies have deceived a lot of women into thinking that their developing baby is a blob of animal tissue. A human embryo has a complete and unique set of human genes. You can use its DNA to prove that it's different from animals. Now, the changes that occur from conception to birth are very dramatic, but they're really only the first part of a process that keeps on going to the age of physiological maturity. That's somewhere in the mid-20s. So you and I have been completely human from conception onwards.
Discovering that the embryo was actually human from conception caused one-time pro-abortion leader Professor Bernard Nathanson to change his mind about abortion.
Well, I think it was the years I spent following my resignation from the clinic, in which I was involved in fetology and basically research into the life cycle, as it were, of the fetus, of the human fetus. I think that as we proceeded to study this area more closely with new technologies such as ultrasound and fetal heart monitoring, it became increasingly clear to me that the fetus was basically just another human being in a confined space for 9 months, but had to be treated no differently than any of us who would be similarly confined in a prison or an institution of some sort.
Even those who carry out abortions acknowledge what they are destroying. Dr. Bertram Weiner ran an abortion clinic in Australia for many years.
I wouldn't pretend to myself that terminating a pregnancy at 8 weeks was not terminating a potential person. So I had a lot of anguish and agony about performing any abortion, because to me it seemed to be the antithesis of what I'd been trained to do medically. When I started medicine when I was 24, and I clearly wanted to do a lot more than most people. But I have come to terms with the fact that it is my duty to serve conscious, aware human persons who exist in this society. And I am not callous. I still realize that 8 weeks or 18 weeks, I am preventing a child from being born. I think anyone who is involved in performing abortions who didn't frequently stop and think, this would have been a baby. This baby may have eaten ice cream at the beach and played in the sand. There would have to be some innately human thing lacking in a person who didn't ask himself or herself those questions.
In spite of this, many people still believe the embryo is less than human, and they feel this frees them to choose abortion.
For years, young men today have heard that it's not a baby, and they've been told that there's nothing there. And I believe today, more than even 18 years ago when I had my abortion, that there's no real value for life.
The right to choose, the right to select, also represents a blatant sham, because the victims, the ones most drastically affected, are the very ones who do not have the right to select, the right to choose what happens to them. It is death by someone else's choice. This is not freedom, but the ultimate type of tyranny. We must remember that the whole reason that Nazi Germany came to be is that some took it upon themselves to choose who would live and who would die. Language also makes the killing of millions possible because it dehumanizes the victims. There's a very important linguistic principle to keep in mind associated with this. That is, the war of words against the victims usually precedes the actual war by decades. The killing phase represents the translation of noxious attitudes into practice. Let me give you some examples. Franz Stengel was interviewed in his cell at Treblinka. He's a former commandant of this death camp. He was asked how could he have presided over the destruction of over 1 million men, women, and children. He said, it had nothing to do with humanity. I never saw them as individuals. It was always a huge mass. The same word mass is used to dehumanize the unborn today. The unborn are not human beings, but just masses of protoplasm or tissue. Another word used, parasite. Adolf Hitler dehumanized the Jews by calling them parasites on the body of Europe. The abortionists today dehumanize the unborn by calling them parasites in the woman's body. It's absolutely remarkable to see the terminology is exactly the same, although the victims differ. Semantics, of course, are used extensively to cover up the killing of the unborn today. For example, the most common term we hear is termination of pregnancy, is never killing an unborn child. During the Hitler regime, it was never killing the Jews, it was always the final solution. That was their major euphemism used. Much of this semantics has taken on a strong medical flavor. Dr. Robert J. Lifton interviewed concentration camp doctors, and he found that they projected their involvement in the killing as a medical procedure, a medical operation, just as doctors today project the killing of the unborn as a minor surgical procedure, a medical procedure. Much of this medical semantics involves redefining the victims as disease entities and reconceptualizing what happens to the victims as treatment for disease.
By the 1950s, the Western world abhorred Hitler's death camps and determined never to allow it to happen again. Life was sacred. How could such a society be convinced to accept the killing of the unborn within a few decades? There is no doubt that younger men and women were influenced by the bringing of evolution into the public schools and the rejecting of the Creator. But what persuaded the older public and politicians?
Well, I was, of course, one of the principal architects of the pro-abortion strategy, and we based our campaign on two major pieces of strategy politically. One was the exaggeration of the number of deaths yearly from illegal abortion. We knew there were no more than 100 to 200 a year in this country, and yet we proclaimed a figure of around 10,000 a year in order to make the impact more dramatic. Secondly, we did single out the Roman Catholic hierarchy as the villain in pro-abortion reform. The Catholic Church was the last major institutional supporter of the Vietnam War, and by the time the abortion reform movement was reaching its apogee, the Vietnam War had become extremely unpopular. And so that we identified the Catholic Church both with abortion law reform, or opposition to abortion law reform, and support of the Vietnam War. With this one tactic, not only did we effectively destroy the resistance of the Roman Catholic Church to permissive abortion, but we also lured to ourselves all the young, vociferous, demonstrating political activists of the Vietnam War protest, so that there was a double dividend here, and it was extremely effective in terms of marshalling more support toward abortion reform.
People are still being manipulated to reject the next generation by textbooks and TV programs that tell us the world is dangerously overpopulated. Modern cities teem with people, urban jungles of high-density housing, traffic noise and ever-increasing pollution. School children are warned daily that mankind is in danger of destroying the planet. There's too many of us. The message is, it's better to abort a child than bring it into an overcrowded, polluted world.
In the large city behind me on the east coast of Australia, almost 2 million people live with their crowded buildings and traffic jams. But beyond that city, for the next 4,000 kilometres, trees outnumber people 1,000,000 to 1. The overcrowded planet is just another convenient lie. You can fit the world's entire population in the 2 smallest counties in Tennessee, USA, and still have plenty of room to spare. The world is not overcrowded, cities are. Pollution problems arise not from how many people there are, but how few places they choose to live. The human population is no reason to abort a child or to not have children. The planet is still basically empty. Come to Australia and see. God told us to multiply and fill the earth, and there's lots to fill yet. But should we fill it with children we've been told are going to be born deformed?
I was born with severe spina bifida, which is one of the disabilities that doctors think so bad that it's better to die, despite which I've had a very full, happy life. I'm very glad to be alive, and while obviously I'd prefer not to be handicapped, I certainly wouldn't prefer to be dead.
Well, from our experience and the joy that we've had with Corina, I find it pretty difficult to really get in touch with people who would want to abort a child like that. You know, to me it's an incredible thing. That little one is so precious to us, and she's a real joy to us. You know, she's a human being. Okay, she's got a disability, but she is still a human being. And anyone who would want to kill, whether before or after birth, a child like that, just, I don't understand the mentality. It just doesn't add up to me. She's a real child, she's a real human being, she's a real bundle of joy to us. It just doesn't add up.
I don't see how anyone can deny Fiona the right to the joy that she gets out of her life. that she contributes joy to other people living, and she has such joy and such happiness in the life that she lives, that I don't see how anyone can say that she should be denied the right to that life.
What went through Dean and Wendy's mind when they were told their unborn baby would be deformed?
It came as quite a shock to me when the doctor informed me that the child that I was carrying had a major chromosome abnormality. Having already given birth to one child who was perfectly normal, I had no reason to believe that this child would be any different. I guess I had an overwhelming sense of uncertainty, but also a sense of fear for my child's future, and also a sense of vulnerability. But I did know that this child that I was carrying was very precious.
Well, as Wendy says, that life was very precious to us, and we had no intention of aborting our baby. But I can honestly say, when the head of the ultrasound department at the hospital was dealing with us and looking at the ultrasound screen, and this man was a silver-haired man with his white coat, a very impressive sort of practitioner. But when he said to us, "We know you want to go full term with this pregnancy, but we wouldn't want you to go through something that we wouldn't want to go through ourselves," I remember feeling an overwhelming sense of fear. What are we committing ourselves to here? And I guess if I didn't, as a Christian, understand the sanctity of human life, I probably could have been tempted to make another decision.
While deformities in the unborn is a serious emotional issue, we should not lose sight of the fact that the number of babies aborted for this reason is small. Over 98% of abortions are for other reasons, and the number of abortions each year is now staggering. In a city the size of New York, the number of children whose lives are terminated is greater than the crowd in this football stadium.
One of the major aspects of deciding to have an abortion for me was my future in my life. At the time, I wasn't doing what I really wanted to be doing. Felt that there was a future ahead of me, and that I wanted to make steps to improve my career prospects, and so that was what I have done in the meantime. I'm very happy about that decision. I'm sure that in the future, when I decide to have a child, it will be a loved and a wanted child, and not something that crept up on me unexpectedly and I had to wear as a result because abortion wasn't available as an option for me.
I was a night nurse, and part of the duties was cleaning theatre after the day's work. We used to have to sift the fetuses and then pack them into plastic containers ready to be thrown away. I took the job because I needed the money at the time, and it was very well paid. And it was after the first few weeks that the nightmares started. And I suppose being a mum, it was even worse. You wake up in a hot sweat in the night and see bits of babies floating past you. I think the worst experience I had was an aborted baby that was live and put out in the sluice, left there crying to die. And I tried to save its life, and I got in awful trouble for doing so.
Why was it allowed to just be left there to die?
Well, because the mother didn't want it.
Basically, it's to preserve a quality of life that most women have abortions, not for psychological instability.
Dr. Wayner's claim has long been borne out by statistics. Less than 2% of abortions are for deformities or rape, yet rape and deformities are the major arguments put forward to support abortion. But what of a life that is conceived from a tragedy such as rape?
I'm totally against abortion because my mother was raped and I was the child that she had, so therefore if she would have aborted back then, I wouldn't even be here. And like as a Christian now, I am so against it as well because I'm bringing up two beautiful children that I've got and another one on the way for God. And, you know, even though what you go through, there is a reason for life.
It's a strange thing, you see. Today people are talking a lot about the quality of life. It means they want to be richer and freer to indulge their appetites and so on. But that's an old story, really, because, I mean, that's what things were like when the Roman Empire finally collapsed. Out of the Christian religion, we had a different set of values, which is that life, we don't speak of the quality of life, we speak of the sanctity of life. And the people who are seeking the quality of life are seeking it at the expense of the sanctity of life, namely at the expense of having one or two children or no children at all, getting rid of what are called unwanted children, bumping off old codgers like me who've lived for 80 years, get us out of the way by giving us some over-sedation if we happen to be in hospital. That's all done in the interest of the quality of life. But as I say, it's at the cost of the sanctity of life, and that's where the 20th century is going to come to grief. I think it's a society destroying itself for one reason, basically, and that is because it's trying to live without God. You can't. Human beings can't.
There can be no doubt that the most significant factor in 20th century humanity turning its back on God has been the theory of evolution. The furor over creationist victories in public schools is testimony to this. Many have ceased to believe man was created in the image of God and have come to regard themselves as naked apes. Man may be only 1.5% genetically different from chimpanzees, but that's 1.5% of at least 19 billion gene bits of information, which is why I'm speaking about the chimps and they're not speaking about me. We have a special section in our brain for speech. It's programmed into our genes, but not the chimps. The reason is profound. Stand in front of a mirror and talk. Your image speaks because you speak. Man has speech because we are made as the reflection of the Creator God who spoke the words, "Let us make man in our image."
It is this God image which makes us and our children different from the animals. It is this difference which gives us also dominion over the planet. If we are overrun by rats, we have authority from the Creator to kill them. Rats weren't made in God's image, but children are. And man has never been authorized to kill the unborn who bear God's image simply to reduce their numbers or for the convenience of adults. But if man is regarded as just another animal, the value of life is survival of the fittest. And if you kill spare cats, you can kill spare kids because you reject the sanctity of their life. But Dean and Wendy chose sanctity, and here is the result.
I'm glad my parents decided to give me the chance to live because I'm glad to be able to enjoy this life that Jesus gave to me, and I'm more than happy to be in a relationship with him.
What about women who have made the other choice and discovered that what begins as short-term gain can become long-term pain? Carol Everett now runs a counselling service for women who have had abortions.
You know, abortion is not against the baby and the mother, it's against the family. You know, I was destroyed, my child was destroyed, my husband and I were divorced. 70% of the relationships in America break up. 70% of the abortion-related relationships in America break up 90 days after the abortion. My own marriage did. Post-abortion syndrome is a post-traumatic stress disorder, similar to rape or incest. And the first stage is denial. And we say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. And they run out and self-destruct for 5, 10, 15 years, which tells you there's no average. And then finally we all come to the same point and say, I killed my baby. And that's when she starts her grieving healing process.
Have you been deceived by society's lies and participated in what have become the socially acceptable centres for destruction of the unborn? If you have reached that point of admitting you have killed your child and you are looking for help and hope and healing, it is available from the same God who gave man his image in the beginning. This Creator loves his creation so much that he not only legislated the death penalty for the murder of man, but he came to this earth as the man Jesus Christ and lived a life without sin, and yet allowed himself to be killed on a cruel Roman cross to pay the penalty for your sin and my sin. And whatever that sin may be, you can be forgiven if you will, by faith, accept what Christ has done in your place. Admit your sin to him in prayer. Accept him as Lord of your life and follow him from this day on, knowing that he is the just and loving God of the born and the unborn as well.